You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. I'm Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a very special person who's going to talk with me about Disney Plus Day and D23 Expo. I know him as Mark, but you know him as Mark Mulcaster. Mark, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. We've got loads to talk about from Star Wars and Marvel and all across the Disney galaxy, but we're just going to talk about Star Wars, of course. And then Disney Plus Day on the 8th of September brought some really interesting programming to Disney Plus. Disney Plus Day. Do you like the concept of a Disney Plus Day? It feels like within their own sphere. It's a good way to get new programming out there and release news about stuff. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's not a bad idea, actually. It's interesting, though, that it happened so close to D23. And I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? The traditionalist in me kind of thinks, well, surely some of this stuff should have been at Celebration. It's that whole thing, isn't it? Like, whereas before we used to be so focused on Celebration, and that's where we'd pretty much get our news almost for the year. You know, that's when the big announcements would be anyway. But now they do a bit at Celebration, then they do a bit on Disney Plus Day, and then they do a bit on D23 or San Diego, and it's just kind of like, it spreads it all out. So for us, it's great because it keeps us talking, and for the general fan base, it keeps them talking. And for those who are kind of more casually Star Wars fans, who kind of dip in and out and don't necessarily follow the news quite as much as we do, obviously it brings it back into their newsfeed. So I'm all on board, and I think it works really well because actually it's something quite unique that none of the other streamers do. So I think they've kind of cornered that little idea now, and I don't think the other streamers can really replicate it.
Yeah, I think Warner Brothers tried it with their DC Fandom. It's about the nearest thing I can think of to a similar thing, and they didn't hold that this year because DC... Well, the DCU or whatever you want to call it seems to be falling around their ears at the moment, doesn't it?
DCU's kind of got so many problems from obviously cast and storylines and confidence in the movies themselves. And I think they've always been on the back foot, just partly because Marvel did it first and did it better than anybody else. So, of course, now everybody compares everything to the MCU. Even people compare what Star Wars is doing to the MCU. You know, for a long time, everybody would compare everything to Star Wars.
10 days until Andor lands on Disney Plus with those 3 episodes. They've put out that sort of sneak peek as you described it. What did you make of that, of what we saw? There was an extended scene with Luthen Rail and Cassian Andor, and then Tony Gilroy and Diego talking about the show. What did you make of that? It was a neat little package, wasn't it?
It was a nice, neat little package, and I think maybe because I've worked on similar packages, it kind of felt like that Tony and Diego Luna really had to put on the salesman pitch, and they were really trying hard to sell Andor, and I don't necessarily think they need to. I mean, that scene alone was really interesting, it's really unique, and obviously it raises so many questions as to what we're actually going to see when Andor does drop. But again, it's nice, and it's nice that they're doing stuff like that. They're not trying to cram it into just a 30-second trailer. You know, we did have a trailer at the end, but just to give us a more of a taste, and I don't know, maybe it is that whole negative aspect to Andor whereby a lot of people, you know, said, oh, we don't need this kind of series and stuff like that. Nobody ever really needs a Star Wars series or any TV series. It's nice to have them, but it's not vital. But, you know, so maybe it's just the fact that it's a lesser-known character from a newer age of Star Wars, and even though it ties right into the OT, I wonder if they've realised that actually they need to push this just to make sure that it gets people's interest, especially now in the autumn when we've got House of Dragons on weekly and we've got Rings of Power on weekly and stuff like that, and everything else. Cobra Kai's just dropped, and, you know, obviously it's just a crazy busy TV time. It's that high period of TV, be it streaming or on linear and broadcast. So therefore, everybody's jostling for that 1 hour each day that people can actually sit down and watch something fantastic. And for me anyway, 21st of September, I've booked that sucker off. First thing I'm doing before I've even had my Frosties is I'm going to be watching those first 3 episodes of the Andor series.
You make the best point, really. Star Wars has never really had scheduling conflicts in the sense of everybody steers clear of Star Wars, but now it's in the television realm and the streaming realm, you just can't do that. So yeah, all those big shows you've just mentioned are all jockeying for our attention. Andor has got to push its way to the front of the queue. We did see some of the UK film magazines like Empire, like Total Film and SFX and such, had House of the Dragon on one cover and Rings of Power on the other, and Andor was like a byline 3 lines down.
Yeah.
And it was still a way away, and I do wonder whether that was part of the decision to put it back a few weeks. It's essentially a press kit, isn't it? That little 10-minute teaser thing.
Exactly.
You know, that kind of feel of, you know, the hype men getting out there and letting people know what it's about, kind of to us feels redundant because we know what it is going to be. It's the Rogue One prequel. We know enough about Cassian. They don't need to sell us on this show. As you say, it's everybody else that needs to be sold on the show. So I really enjoyed it for what it was. It was 9 minutes, not quite 10 minutes, but it was a 9-minute package. That gave, I think, people a really good flavour of Andor. But then stepping forward to A Jedi's Return, I will never not cringe saying that title. There was no freaking S in Jedi, so I'm sorry. It should be A Jedi Returns, not A Jedi's Return. But anyway, I was just delighted by the whole thing. That was just around about an hour long.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was fantastic. Every time we get an episode of a gallery for The Mandalorian or another special for Book of Boba Fett or what have you, I think they really know how to make documentaries, not only in Lucasfilm, but on Disney Plus as well. And it's not actually a very original idea in its conception to actually have people, the main cast, viewing stuff like Star Wars on a big screen like they did throughout the whole of the documentary and that. But I thought it was a really fantastic and possibly quite expensive use of the volume to do that. It was also quite interesting because it shows how versatile that environment is, because, all those interviews were basically shot on the volume in those environments. It wasn't too hyperbolic. It felt genuine, but also fun. People like you and Matt, they understand the importance of the character and the weight of what Star Wars is, but also they're comfortable enough to have a bit of fun with it as well.
It made me smile, Ewan talking about watching it as a kid, not once mentioning that he went to see it because his mom's brother was in the film playing Wedge Antilles.
Exactly.
And also, his brother is in the RAF and his call sign is OB2.
That's right,
so
yeah.
I think his brother's called Colin. They were fans as kids, and Ewan says, we had that whole film memorised word for word. Can never remember what episode 2 is actually called whenever he gets asked it, but hey-ho. It was a nice introduction to you. It was a nice introduction to Deborah Chow as well. They're sort of explaining how they're bridging Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope, but placing this very steadily within those two as well. I've seen footage of George and Ewan in the past on Phantom Menace before, but I don't remember seeing this particular scene of them meeting for the very first time.
The clothing really dates it. But
just a bit, yeah.
They did that actually as well. Some of the ILM documentaries, didn't they? They used some of that footage from the beginning, from the Phantom Menace behind the scenes making of. I remember the one scene, obviously, that is in the beginning is when Ewan gets to pick his lightsaber and he's all very excited when they kind of start shaving his hair and stuff like that. Basically, what you have is you just have like Rick McCallum just on the phone talking to him, kind of going, that's freaking amazing. And, he can't say more than 4 words without an F-bomb.
True.
And even actually that one shot, I don't think I've ever seen the beginning first clip of Alec Guinness. And this has been the real gift so far this year. We had it with Industrial Light and Magic documentaries, and we've had it now with the Obi-Wan Kenobi documentary. They're still finding these little bits of behind the scenes from 40 plus years ago that we've never seen. And so I would love to go and just spend a week, if not a month, going through the archive and just watching all the rushes for everything, because I bet there's some real hidden gems in there.
Well, when the Skywalker Saga documentary was done for episode 9, I know that the director of that had a chance to go through the archives and pull all sorts of crazy stuff from way back. So I would imagine a lot of that stuff is probably more in their line of sight now than it maybe has been for a long, long time.
I'm Brian Herring, BB-8 puppeteer, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. That'll learn you.
You've been talking about how, the kids of the prequels are now 20 years older and it feels more like it's their Star Wars, which is a really good observation. And then there was something that I'd picked up in the writing on the screen, basically, and I'd not seen this before. I've only ever known Reva as Reva, and it actually gave her full name of Reva Savander, and it did give a couple of other characters' names, Tala Darith, Corlin Roken. I've not seen these before. Maybe I've missed them on Wikipedia. I don't know if they're on card backs for the figures, but I've only ever seen Reva. I've never seen Reva Savanda.
I have to double check my Reva figure, but I'm pretty sure it just says Reva. I don't think it gives her full name, which is really interesting. And it's an interesting way to slip out a little bit of extra canon information for us and Matt.
Yeah.
So there's a nice warmth about this. They didn't spend a huge amount of time talking to Vivian Lara Blair, and I may have liked to have seen a little bit more, but then I suppose she is only 10, so you kind of wonder actually how much she's going to give. But she seemed from the making of footage pretty engaged and pretty switched on when it came to the character and her acting. It's not like Deborah was just kind of saying, do this, do that. You know, she was asking questions like, oh, do you want me to look up and do this and what have you? And
the whole hug thing was from her, wasn't it?
Exactly. So, and you kind of think, well, that's fantastic, because that shows the confidence that they had in the little girl, but also, you know, how kind of intelligent she is as an actor, you know, which really fills me with excitement to see what she could go on and do in the future.
One thing that really stood out as well as they were moving through the show and showing a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff was, given that people now assume, like they did 20 years ago, that everything is CG and ILM built more models for Phantom Menace than they'd built for the whole OT, that everything in Kenobi, for example, is stagecraft. And you realise, oh, actually, no, there was a lot of sets built out on location and an awful lot of blue screen extension work that was happening on these episodes. There was a lot of blue screen. Ewan had said about how sick he got of blue and green screen on the prequels, but watching this, nowhere near the level that it was then. It really was just drapes everywhere, but a lot more blue screen than I imagined.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in some respects they are still limited, aren't they, to the length and size and scale they can do towns and stuff like that in the volume. You know, you can see when they've used it quite a bit, because it's great for set extensions, but you know, if you actually want to have people physically moving through space, then you still need that physical space to move through. So it kind of makes sense, like they had the blue screen of the Inquisitors and Matt Landon, because you know, well, that's obviously going to be a CG element. You don't need to build anything other than the ramp. It even looked like that whole quarry was an actual set, rather than what I thought was they literally just went and just filmed in the quarry. It had that kind of vibe, which I don't know is necessarily a compliment or not, because it still felt a little bit too grounded in the real world for me. But I was quite surprised that actually, they did that. And obviously, you kind of saw that they CG enhanced the amount of fire and that they had put in that scene as well. They're finding a nice balance. And that's the thing, because I think you could run the risk, a bit like with relying too heavily on green screen and blue screen, you could probably run the risk of relying too heavily on the volume and therefore limiting what you can do. And I suppose, as everything, it's a cost thing. What's cheaper to do? What's going to be easier to rebuild and remake and reuse? And a lot of those elements could have been built for the Book of Boba Fett or vice versa, so therefore there's a cost-saving aspect to it. It is now that whole notion of just finding the right tool for the job, which ultimately is what filmmaking should be about.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it seems like they're finding their way and figuring out what's the right tool, as you say, for the right part of the work. Another observation I made, you saw that sequence when they were looking at all the creature heads. An awful lot of sequel trilogy creature heads were in there, weren't there? There was a lot of stuff that was clearly made for the sequel trilogy that's been shipped over to the States, because pretty much everything on that table appeared to be a sequel trilogy head.
Yeah, it did. And I suppose actually we've seen this from the Rebel Legion's perspective, actually, that we're picking out bits of sequel era trilogy costumes and costume bits. Like, I think one of the proto rebels, you know, from the Hidden Past was wearing the same kind of vest that Billy Lord's character Connix wears. And then also the belts, the PCE belts, which are very military belts and very generic belts. But up until, you know, the Force Awakens, you never seen them in Star Wars, and suddenly they're freaking everywhere. You know, it's that whole thing of like, how can you save money? And also, they don't necessarily have the time to, you know, if you had to build all those alien heads from scratch, you wouldn't have so many aliens in this series. Or at least not as many that look so authentic and engaging. You'd probably end up with rubber heads on people in costumes, and that's about it. But actually being able to kind of reuse some of these characters, and I suppose also what it does, one of the critiques of the sequel trilogy was the fact that it felt like it was completely disconnected from the original trilogy in respects of you didn't see Greedos and Rodians, and you didn't see all these fantastic coloured characters. But actually, ironically, by infusing some of those aliens into the OT era, it then connect the two. It just makes it feel like it's all one connective galaxy, and therefore you're going to have all these characters crisscrossing around the place and popping up in Obi-Wan, and then obviously Andor, and so I think it's fantastic.
It was a 125-day shoot. I picked up as well that the Ian McDiarmid scenes appeared to have been shot here in the UK, and Deborah was directing via video. So that's interesting. I'd be curious. They didn't say, but I'd be curious to see whether that was shot at Pinewood or a smaller studio, because, again, that was clearly entirely a blue screen sequence. And where Ian's makeup would have been done, I'd love to know where that was done. That wasn't quite explained. But there was a couple of other neat little things that were said. I think Ewan said that Vivian had the same job to do in regards to Carrie Fisher's performance as Ewan had in relation to Alec Guinness's performance.
Yeah.
And he was very clear, just going back to Vivian briefly, that how to give her the props and the credit for the performance that she gave, which is like you said, Deborah gave her latitude to find the little moments within the realms of a young Leia, and also that she absolutely loves droids. You see her hugging R5, which was very cool. But the thing that really struck me the most was when Hayden said, and this was direct from George, so this is a George thing, that even when he's Darth Vader, he's still the chosen one. That's the takeaway line for me from this whole thing. I thought that was really thought-provoking.
I thought that was fantastic. That was just one of those things that was never going to be said by anybody else, I don't think. I don't know if we got enough Anakin in the Kenobi series. I mean, we had that one episode where they did the practice duel and stuff, which then led right into the main duel. But yeah, it would have been nice to have seen some other little moments, just some other little kind of character moments somewhere along the lines. But you kind of go, well, come on, let's do another story. Let's do another limited series with Kenobi, and let's get some more stuff with Anakin and Obi-Wan, whilst they're all game for it, and whilst they're thinking this is a good thing to do.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Saturday, the 10th of September, it was the studio showcase at D23 Expo. That included 20th Century Studios, Marvel, and of course Lucasfilm, not just from the galaxy far, far away, but also from Indiana Jones and Willow. On Fanthatrax, we compiled and refreshed and updated tweets and news from all over the place as it was happening, so hopefully you were following that. One thing that happened first was it's Disney's 100th anniversary next year, and from autumn there is a new intro with the Disney Castle, which was designed by ILM, with music arranged by Christoph Beck. It's the When You Wish Upon a Star music. So that's going to be slightly different. So that was, I think that was shown on the 9th. So that's now going to be going out with everything from autumn onwards. And the whole presentation kicked off. Kathleen Kennedy came on stage. The cast of Andor came out with her. And then they rolled out this brand new final official trailer for season 1 of Andor. I was rather enthused. It looks pretty damn good. It's got a scope to it. It's got a swagger to it. It's gritty and grimy. The music sounds cool. What did you make of it, Mark?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same, really. You've kind of got those opening shots of Andor and all that, where, the troops walking through. I like how they kind of pick out some key players. They pick out Andor, they pick out Mothma, they pick out Saw Gerrera and stuff like that. And I like how they've really built up, this gritty side of what was quite really until Rogue One and this series as well. Hey, we're all rebels, and we're the good guys, and we save the day, and we don't really get our hands too dirty. No, we're down and we're shooting people and we're blowing stuff up and we're stealing things, and I like just how the determination of Andor. He's got his intent when he's walking through and stuff like that. He's focused. He's motivated.
Other bits we've seen in here, like you say, looking at characters like Saw Gerrera, it's hugely exciting to see a guy like that back, and obviously Forrest Whitaker's back in the role. They've done a great job of making him look that bit younger, because obviously in Rogue One he was just wrecked. We only see him from sort of the chest up, but he doesn't appear to have all the same apparatus. Maybe that's something we'll see happen during the scope of Andor. And also there's other characters we've seen in there that we're not familiar with yet, but I just wonder how over the time, and I'm thinking probably season 2, because it's so carefully designed to be 3-episode blocks, that other generals and captains, Merrick and Draven and characters like that, and maybe Dodonna, will come into the second season of Andor more prominently. It just feels like they're very cleverly and cautiously and judiciously adding these elements to the show, so that when we get to that final episode 24 as we now know it will be at the end of the second season, leading right into Rogue One. Every character we meet in Rogue One will be right there, ready to go.
Absolutely, yeah. You've got to find that balance, don't you? How much do you try and going to squeeze into one season of like, oh right, by the end of season one, all the blocks are going to be in place. He's going to meet K2SO and everything else. But you kind of think, well, no, it's like a slow burn. It's a spark that lights the fire that burns down the curtains and the rug kind of thing of the galaxy. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You kind of want it to be like that. And they did this, I think, pretty well with some of the Star Wars Marvel comics. They take 2 steps forward and then they take 3 steps back because they've just been annihilated and set back by the Empire. So it'd be interesting just to see, how plain sailing it is or how difficult it is for them just to get up and do it. And also, I guess for people like Mon Mothma, who obviously is an idealist and is very much aware of the atrocities that's going on in the galaxy and also the injustice that's happening in the Senate, to actually take that final leap and go, you know what, I'm not just calling you out on this, I'm now going to become part of something that is going to actively stand up against you and take you down. No.
Warwick Davis came out onto the stage at D23. They premiered the poster for the the first season of Willow, and then there again put out a trailer. I was really impressed by the trailer. Now, I can't pretend to be a huge fan of Willow. It was a film back in the day that I watched. I don't think I even saw it at the cinema. I think I saw it on video and it landed on home video. I wasn't blown away by it. I think I was still, 17 at the time?
Yeah, you're
very much of a mind
wrong age.
Yeah, and I think it was also just thinking, why are you spending 30 million on this when you could spend 30 million on another Star Wars film? And I didn't get the logistics and the building of it all. And now I think I appreciate Willow more than I did then. I certainly do. And was really enthused by this trailer.
I think the first one which came out, the teaser, I was like, yeah, okay. But then this one, I'm just like, this just feels right. It's not the kind of film that has the same impact as Star Wars or some other kind of fantasy films of that era, but it has its own special place. And obviously from a VFX and ILM perspective, it's a very pivotal point in time with morphing technology and stuff like that. I haven't seen Willow for my sins in a long time. I really need to sit down, carve out the time to sit down and watch the original Willow, especially before the series drops.
30th of November, Disney Plus, Willow Season 1. Dave Filoni came out on stage to talk about Lucasfilm Animation, tells us that Bad Batch Season 2 is not coming in September as we previously thought it was going to land, actually now landing on the 4th of January. So Bad Batch Season 2 is a 2023 release, 16 episodes, but then news of the 6 episodes on October 26th of Tales of the Jedi, and along with that, there was also a trailer. I thought that looked just glorious. I was really, really stoked by what we saw in that. Going back in time to early days of Dooku with Qui-Gon, always a character that's going to excite and interest people. And also great, just stepping back to A Jedi's Return. The sequence with Liam Neeson at the end of that, saying how excited he was to come back for that. So there's a lovely synergy there.
Yeah, I was really surprised by it because it didn't feel like they made a huge amount of a big deal about it at Celebration. It didn't feel like I got that time to focus on it. This was just like, from the makers of the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch. And it's like, This is exactly the same level of animation quality that we've grown to expect from the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch. I don't know how short animation is for them, if it's going to be like 5 minutes or 15 minutes. But it looked like there's still some serious amounts of meat on those bones. So it's going to be fascinating. And I'm I'm assuming that those 2 storylines kind of cross over in interesting ways, even though one's happening in the past, i.e. with Dooku, and then obviously one's happening in the present with Anakin and Ahsoka. So it'll be interesting just to see if it's just parallels and like teaching comparisons or something like that. But I'm really fascinated and can't wait for this to land. Am I right in thinking it's all episodes drop on one day?
Yeah, all 6 episodes land on the 26th of October. Fascinating, looks incredible, visuals look great, audio sounds brilliant, can't wait. And then Dave moved on to live action and showed us a shot which really got people talking and buzzing. He showed a shot of Ahsoka, but he also showed a shot of Sabine live action. First time we've seen a live action Sabine standing in front of a relief, a mural, which is basically the final shot of the last episode of Rebels, up on the wall. It looks amazing. Just the thought of a live action Sabine looking at a painting which is in the style of the animated Rebels. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, maybe it's some kind of synergy behind what he wants to do. Really kind of doubling down on this is almost a continuation of Rebels in through Ahsoka. It's going to be interesting. I'm really excited just to see how they can develop Sabine as a character in the live action arena.
Not a lot of news about Skeleton Crew. There was a shot of Jude Law in character. It's the door droids, the ball droids, the eye droids, as you saw in Return of the Jedi and the Mandalorian, sort of all poking out at him and him kind of grinning at them. Bunch of kids behind. A couple of them may be alien characters. It's kind of hard to tell. But it's the very first shot we've got of Skeleton Crew. Favreau spoke to John Watts on the set of Spider-Man about directing an episode of The Mandalorian, and it turns out, just like Favreau had an idea for Mandalorian, John Watts had a great idea for his own show.
Hi, this is George Mann, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Season 3 Mandalorian. First off, Rick Famuyiwa came on board. He's now an executive producer, which I think is brilliant news. We've talked a lot about Rick on the show. Favreau's editing Season 3 as we speak. The whole cast comes out. Pedro Pascal's quite overcome with emotion talking about it. And then the trailer for Season 3 of Mandalorian. Brilliantly done. Just a bit of flashback to what we've seen before, and then plenty of new stuff. The scope on the visuals looked ridiculous. It looked even more cinematic than before.
I thought it was freaking awesome. I believe that was what they showed at Celebration. I'm really liking how the season's going to shape up. I think it's going to be interesting. It looks like there's going to be some real kind of heavy twists along the way, and I think we're going to see Mando really start to question a lot. And, you know, maybe we're going to see the true motivations behind Bo-Katan, and just that one line about, like, did you think your dad was the only Mandalorian? I mean, I'm just really excited just to see what actually Mandalore now looks like in this Disney Plus era. And we're probably going to double down, and it's going to be darker, and I think it's going to be grittier.
One thing we spoke about, I think, on the last episode of Making Tracks was Filoni saying how enthused and excited he was about making Ahsoka because he's got that chance to take this animated character, essentially animated character, and breathe new life into her in the live action realm and tell the stories that he always wanted to tell. It feels, again, with that Sabine shot, looking at the relief, the mural of the end scene of Rebels, essentially, all those characters that she would have known. They're really working hard to fold in animation fully, you know, into the story of Star Wars, and that's just the format that we're telling it. Of course, we know in real life, if they could have made the Clone Wars as a live action show back in 2008, they probably would have done if they got the tech we've got today. That being said, it's canon, it's all canon, it's every bit as valid, but it really feels like they're making the effort to merge them together. Did that come across to you?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that, you know, we've talked about in the past, isn't it? How there shouldn't really be a snobbery between animation and live action. It should all be one level playing field. And I think they've also think that as well. So good on that Lucasfilm of that. I think because animation has always had that it's for kids aspect about it, and we know for years that it hasn't been like that, but at the same time it's still a great way to introduce younger audience members to Star Wars in a way that's going to keep them slightly more engaged. Try and plonk a 5 or 6 year old down in front of, or even the Phantom Menace. It's quite long and it's kind of slow. It's not going to keep their attention, and all they're going to do is laugh at Jar Jar, and that's going to be it. And they're not even going to watch A New Hope. It's even slower, really, by today's comparison. So you need to kind of grab those younger audience members' attention and introduce them to these characters. So then, as they grow up, they can like, oh my God, that's Ahsoka. I used to love watching Ahsoka in the Clone Wars. It's another now Star Wars fan who is of a different age and a different demographic. And so it's a way to keep the storytelling and the franchise ticking over. So I think it's fantastic. And I mean, I don't really know the difference in terms of budget between, let's say, an episode of, say, Kenobi and an episode of Bad Batch, but I would imagine you'd be able to get at least 4 or 5 episodes of Bad Batch for the price of one episode of Kenobi. And so therefore it's a way to be able to churn out more storytelling at a slightly cost-effective way. So therefore you can take risks on the, you know, the characters and the story that you tell. And if it doesn't necessarily work, it's not quite as big a loss as it is if you kind of spend $100 million on like 6 episodes of Kenobi.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
They finally did step away from Star Wars, but they didn't step too far. They stepped across to Indiana Jones. Indy 5 is coming out next year, but the people in the room did get to see footage from Indy 5. The rest of the world didn't. James Mangold apparently was working with John Williams on the score only the day before.
Oh, wow.
Ford came out on stage with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. There is footage of Harrison speaking on stage, getting quite emotional, actually, talking about this being his final turn as Indy. What a great film it is. On the site, we posted some images from the booth at D23, the Lucasfilm pavilion, essentially. And there were, I think, 3 or 4, maybe 4 pieces of pre-production artwork. One showing a hotel called the Atlantique, one showing a sort of a rickshaw, almost like a rickshaw type chase through the streets. Another of Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, Helena, her outfit. Of course, we heard the John Williams music the previous week. But yeah, what did you make of what we saw of Indy at D23?
Well, I think anything at the moment that we're seeing is better than nothing because, like you said, it seems to be so tightly under wraps. It's cool. I mean, what about you? What did you think? Because, like I said, you're the bigger Indy fan.
I'm stoked. I mean, there were people talking online. Apparently, there's a scene where he rides a horse through the subway. Salah is back, apparently, from Raiders and from Last Crusade, so Salah's back. So there's lots of little things that I'm hearing that are really enthusing me. And also, it was said online, and I'm assuming this was mentioned in the panel at some point, that we knew Spielberg was involved as an executive producer, but it was kind of said that Lucas had nothing whatsoever to do with it. And I saw, and I don't know where this came from, so this may just be people talking online and there may be nothing to it, but there were messages out there, more than one, saying that Spielberg and Lucas both worked on Indy 5. So I don't know in what capacity, whether he was just a sounding board, what a sounding board, or whether he came up with help from the MacGuffin. But nevertheless, it doesn't come out till June.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of time to keep working on things. I'm really enthused by it. I loved that piece of music, that Helena's theme. I really did. It was its own thing, but it just had subtle nods to previous Indy themes. Not just Indiana Jones, all of it. Willow looks fascinating, and all of the Star Wars stuff. I love the deep dive feel of Tales of the Jedi. I'm really enthused by Season 3 Mando because it just has a fresh feel and the visuals look fantastic. And Andor, totally stoked for Andor. That feels epic. And I'm so excited for that to launch and for people to start seeing it. So I think D23, some people were disappointed online. I thought D23 was a pretty damn good turnout for Lucasfilm.
Sometimes I just wonder how much would it take for people to actually be totally satisfied. You know, if you got the trailer for Indiana Jones, for example, D23, would that keep people happy? Or would they want more? Would they want to know the title? There's always going to be something else that is being left back for subsequent panels or press releases, or they might not even know anything. You know, is it just the fact that we haven't had really or many new series announced? And were they expecting new series to be announced? I mean, okay, yeah, everybody still, I think, refers back to that real first kind of investors call, which you could always say was like a bit like a Disney Plus day. You know, they announced, was it 11 or 12 series, and we haven't really got a huge amount from Acolyte. We haven't had nothing really from Lando. And Droid Tales, that seems to have dropped off from the face of the earth as well. But it's like those things might just have gone the way that TV productions do, and they might be delayed indefinitely, or, you know, they might have just realised these aren't actually what we need right now, so we might get something else. I think it's always difficult, isn't it? Because you're commentating on this really from the outside, and it doesn't even matter if you have got friends who are in the know, who work in the industry. But ultimately, unless you are in the boardroom of Lucasfilm, that you're never really going to know what's going on. And you just kind of have to accept it and be appreciative for the Star Wars that we have, and, you know, not worry about what we haven't got, because I'm sure we'll get it eventually.
But I've got to say, I really thought the Lucasfilm presentation was excellent. From what we saw, I mean, okay, it wasn't live streamed, so we didn't see it as it happened. We were sort of following it along social media feeds. But nevertheless, as it seemed to roll out and people came on stage and information was given and details were there, good weekend's work for Lucasfilm all in all.
That is about all we have time for today's little special look at Disney Plus Day and everything at D23. Mark, can you let people know how they can get in touch and all that?
Thanks for listening to Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Like Mark just said, get your questions in. We'll talk about anything and everything else besides. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panther Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out our Panther Tracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday night at 7 p.m. UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Well done, mate. I tell you what, that seems to get longer and longer, that does. Bless you. Right, me and Mark will be in Leicester this coming weekend at the National Space Centre for the return of the Garrison. I'll be there with Rebel Legion and Fan for Tracks, and obviously Mr. Newbold will be there with Fan for Tracks. So if you're in the Leicester area, swing by. It's a fantastic day, and of course you get to meet loads of characters from the 501st and the Rebel Legion and the Mando Mercs and droid builders, and generally it's just an all-round great day. But until then, may the Force be with you. God save the King.